Welcome back. I'm your host, John Knocklinger. I'm a men's divorce coach and a New Jersey divorce attorney and mediator. On today's show, we're going to discuss relationship awareness, including looking back at relationships that didn't quite work out to make sure the next one is awesome, and much more. My guest for this conversation is Carrie Sackett from the great state of Arizona, meaning she didn't have to deal with this recent time change like many of us just went through. And let me tell you, this week has been rough for everyone that had to change time. She's the founder of ZPD Coaching, a virtual practice specializing in relationships, couples, and family work. She's also the co-author of Social Therapeutic Coaching, a practical guide to group and couples work, which you can find on Amazon, I'm guessing. Carrie has more than 25 years of experience helping people from all walks of life learn how to exercise their emotional and relational muscles. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. She's a certified coach and trained in somatic coaching. You can learn more about Carrie at zpdcoaching.com. Thank you for being here today, Carrie.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me on. I've been really looking forward to our conversation and connecting with your listeners.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. You have a very unique sort of thing that you do. And so I can't wait to hear all about it. So like I like to do with all of our guests, I want to go back and find out how you got into this. So could you tell our listeners a little bit about how you started helping people going through these major life issues, and maybe just a little bit about the social therapeutic coaching that you do?
Sure. Well, to start this story, I have to say that I was a New Yorker, New York City, Lower Manhattan gal for 30 years before I moved to Arizona. And I actually moved to New York City to train with the founders of the approach that I practice, which is called social therapeutics. I was a young woman then, and I wasn't ready to sit in a chair all day and work with people. And so I went out into the business world and did a lot of work with change management and employee engagement, all things that are group related. I took what I was trained in into the business world. And then over 10 years ago, a friend of mine in New York was going through a divorce, and he was seeing a therapist, and he would sometimes tell me what was going on in the sessions with his therapist. And I actually kind of shook my head and I thought, God, I could do better than that. And I went back and brushed up on social therapeutics and began my practice as a coach, a life and relationship coach, working with individuals, couples, and families.
Nice. Well, that's what a lot of our listeners need help with is relationship help. A lot of people, when they marriage ends, they look at it as a failure as opposed to just a transitional part of their life. So I want to, since you just brought up divorce, let's just start right there. Divorce represents probably one of the most significant transitional points in one's life. Maybe only second to having a baby or something like that. But it's very significant. And going from what someone's known to what they don't know is just so difficult for many people, especially men, but women too. I mean, it's difficult for everybody. So take us into how you help people, Carrie, who have come out of a relationship that didn't really work, and they're either in that dumpy place where they're just can't get out of bed. They don't know how to even move on, or they've gotten out of that stage, but now they're looking at another relationship and maybe they haven't fully figured out what happened with the first one.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I wrote the book, I think what you're saying is very important. And it's the moment where I really wish that people would reach out and get support to move through that moment in their lives. And one of the reasons I wrote the book and why it's so successful and it's being picked up as a textbook for both coaches and therapists is that I help people move forward in their lives while embracing uncertainty. And there's the specific uncertainty of ending a particular moment in your journey and opening the door to something that you don't know what it's going to be. We're also living in what we subjectively experience as more uncertain times, whether that's politically or environmentally or socially and emotionally. So going back to what you were saying at the opening of the show, I help people grow emotional muscles, emotional relational muscles that they can use while they're working through the next and entering into a new chapter in their lives, which is going to feel very uncertain.
So how do you do that? I mean, I know that's a loaded question, but how do you train someone to use emotional muscles? I mean, most of us probably haven't realized that, you know, emotions have muscles. So how do you even make someone aware of that to even get to the point where you can help train them?
Yes. Well, a lot of the work I do, and generally in these situations, I'll see somebody individually, I'll see a man individually, and then after a period of time, invite him into one of my life development groups. And the reason for that is we need others to help us grow. Like when you look back at a failed relationship, obviously the two of you in that relationship created that house together. However messy and hurtful and painful and horrible, you both participated in creating it. So to go forward in life and to start a new relationship, a lot of men are looking for ways to say, gee, I don't want to do what I just did again. But you need me and then others, like other members of a life development group, where you can practice doing new kinds of things emotionally, like babbling even what you think you might be feeling, because you might not even have any idea how you're feeling, or practicing sharing what it's like to hear what someone else has said to you. That relationality is so much a part of emotional growth, permissioning ourselves to actually check in with the other person that we're in conversation or the other people and say, what was that like for you to hear me and what I said? That, first of all, is really, really hard to say to somebody else. That's one of the first things I work on when I am doing individual work with a client is, what's it like for you to hear me say this to you? What's it like for you to say what you're saying to me? How are we doing in building our relationship in this conversation? So is that giving you some sense of part of what's required in order to build new emotional relational muscles?
Sure. I think that people that are coming out of a marriage and they need to learn perhaps how to, flex these emotional muscles. One of the things that's very difficult is figuring out what help you need. So some people will hear what you're talking about and will immediately confuse it with talk therapy and think that it's just something like talk therapy. So, and I think that's important that people understand the difference between what you do and what most people consider to be a traditional therapy session. Can you address that a little bit?
Yes, and I'm glad you're saying that, because when I found social therapeutics as a young woman, it was emerging as an alternative to traditional therapy. It was getting created in that time. I was trained by the founders. So traditional therapy is more, talk therapy can be more talking at, or just, I need someone to sit there and listen to me and I can do whatever I want or need. In social therapeutics, and bringing relationality into the work means, hi, we're doing this together. We're building our relationship. What is it you're wanting me to hear in the 10 minutes of what you're saying, so that we can build and create something together, a new kind of conversation where we can make some discoveries, where new things can emerge, where there might be space where you might try on an emotion, or maybe I'll give you a line to try saying to me. There's a lot of improv and tools of theater that's embedded in social therapeutics, not only, but in particular around relationships. We have been given scripts. We have off-the-shelf boxes that we fall into. I help people create their relationships. That means we have to do things we don't know how to do or we've never done before. So we want to give ourselves permission. And again, I do this individually with my clients, but also in couples work and in group work and family work. Give people permission to try out new lines with each other. What did that feel like? What was it like to hear that? Did you see a new possibility off of trying to do something new and different here together? So that we're opening up space without knowing where we're going. So it's uncomfortable, but very developmental.
That's interesting, trying on a new emotion. I've never heard anyone say that before. That's very fascinating. Mm-hmm. You're talking a lot about helping couples better communicate. So take this to a situation where someone isn't in a relationship, and it's really just about learning from what just happened so that their next relationship, they will have these muscles so that hopefully they're in a better place. I guess it's a two-part question for you. Is one, how does your approach differ when there's not a relationship? And number two, what do you do when you have met with a client who has learned all of these things, and then they enter into this new relationship with a spouse that didn't work with you, and so hasn't gone through these things?
Yes. So your two-part question is, what is it like when one half of a partnership is working with you and the other half isn't?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, say the other question again.
Well, the other part of the question is just when you're not working with a relationship, you're just working with a single person who's not in, because, you think about a divorce, you're coming out of a marriage, and now maybe you're trying to figure out what went wrong so that your next relationship is better.
Yes. And I applaud everybody who decides to do that work. It's not easy work to look at how you participated in a failed relationship, your vulnerabilities, ways that you, were hurtful or fell short. So that comes up. See, we're not that person only in a committed marriage or relationship. We're that person everywhere in life. It might look a little different, but those vulnerabilities that we have show up everywhere. So they're going to show up also in building the relationship with me in individual work. And then it's that creating an environment in which we can radically accept what I like to call our underdevelopments. Nobody's perfect. We all have ways that we're less developed. We all have ways we're more developed than other people. But if we want to grow, we're going to want to work on the underdevelopments, and we have to create an environment where it's safe to expose it, to feel held and heard in it, and then to try new things, to build and create with it. We can't ignore our underdevelopments and act like they're not there. We can't grow that way. We have to kind of own them, but we can't do it only by ourselves. So if looking inward and knowing mentally what our underdevelopments are, if that were enough, we would all be over the moon happy. We'd be experts at living our best lives. We need others to help us see who we are, what our underdevelopments are, how we impact on others. So that's a lot of the work, very in the moment, present and forward looking and relational work that I do with clients.
I think that's wonderful. When we look at, again, when someone's in a relationship and one person has worked with you, or maybe they weren't in a relationship and they worked with you coming out of one, and now they're in a new relationship. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious how you train your clients to deal mm-hmm. with that situation. Because I think about it from this perspective. If you're in a marriage and someone does mindset training, let's say, in the relationship, and learns to, really focus in on things that are holding you back, trying to get rid of those fears and those internal subconscious things that are really interfering with your ability to really get where you want to get in life. And the other spouse isn't doing it. It is just a recipe for the end of a relationship, because at some point, the person who's doing the work is going to just leave the other person in the dust. And they're going to start to realize that that other person is an anchor on their ability to flex these new things. So I'm really curious, from your perspective, how do you train your clients to address that?
Well, in this particular situation, I would support my client to go to their spouse or partner and be able to say almost exactly what you said. Hey, I feel like I'm doing the heavy lifting here. I feel like I'm working on us and I'm not experiencing you embracing that, or I'm not experiencing us working on it together. I'm feeling alone in working on my relationship. What's it like to hear me say that? Or what do we do now? What do we do now? See, when I work with couples, it's what does the relationship need? So in this case, the client is saying, hey, I'm trying to be on the side of the relationship. Where are you? That's a muscle to build and develop, to be able to give and say honestly where you're at, what your experience is, not from the perspective of being right or trying to change the other person or judging them, but as an offer. Here's my experience. Where are you with this? So a lot of the work I do with people, again, individually, in couples work, and in the life development groups, which I want to come back to, even with this example, it's a yes and. What do we create? What are we creating together? How can I hear an offer in what the other person is saying? What is there to build with? It's a give and create. So going to the partner and saying, I feel like I'm pulling my weight here and trying to grow our relationship, and I don't experience you with me, that's an offer to the partner. And they're going to respond in some way that we don't know what it's going to be. That's the uncertainty part. And then we go from there in creating the conversation. So,
yeah, I just wanted to chime in right there, because I just feel like if you decide, if you're in a relationship and you decide to go work with someone like you, Carrie, and your spouse isn't interested in doing it, isn't that the biggest red flag of all? That someone doesn't recognize that there's even an issue that needs to be resolved? Yeah.
Well, then yes. So fill in the blank after the scene we just performed here, that I just performed. And then you have to hear what your partner says. And then you might bring that back to group or to individual session and say, here's what they said. And then I'm saying, okay, now what do you want to do? What are you seeing? What are you wanting? And then supporting people to be creators of their lives and giving people the support to make the decisions that they need and want to make. So it can absolutely go there.
I'm wondering when you're talking to people about working with you and working through this method, I can already, just from working with men in the coaching context, I can already tell you they're not very apt to want to talk about their emotions. I mean,
Yes.
just getting a man to go to therapy is like
Yes.
pulling teeth.
Yes.
And then beyond that, you know, you're explaining to us your method and how it's useful and how it works. It would seem that it might take a lot more to get a lot of men to want to do this. And quite frankly, getting in touch with your emotions is probably one of the most important things in a relationship. So have you encountered having men be more resistant to wanting to work through this method? And if so, how do you overcome that? If not?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I work with a lot of men, and we're able to build a relationship fairly quickly. So I'm more developed emotionally, relationally. So the men I work with are deciding pretty quickly if they feel comfortable building a relationship with me. And I can tell you that many men decide to do that. And we build that kind of trust. I can't make people do something, of course. I really want to work with people who want to do the work. But again, oftentimes we don't know what it entails, or it feels really scary. And honestly, for many men that I work with, we work together individually for a period of time, a couple of months or longer sometimes, and then they come into a life development group. A life development group is mixed, men, women, all walks of life, diverse geographically, racially, by class, by issue they want to work on. And I think, actually, to even more directly answer your question, in working with me, men discover that they actually have something to give. I think a lot of times, again, the way our society structures relationships, it's all about getting from each other. And very quickly in working with me, I relate to men as that they do have something to give. And I think that's what makes them responsive. And they'll follow me, and they'll follow me into a life development group where they get so much support from all kinds of different people supporting them. Like, so men have come into my life development group and decided whether or not, they have included the group in deciding whether or not to stay in the marriage. How's that for wild?
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And that's way more helpful, actually, than doing it only with me individually. That's why I wanted to include the life development group in here, because even though I'm a coach, people might see me as an authority or figure, or wanting an answer from me or what they're supposed to do. I don't do that. I'm a supporter. I'll lead people in creating environments that are intimate and growthful and helpful and connected with a sense of community. So when you come into group, that's what people experience. And over time, first they discover they have something to give to others in the group when they come in and talk about what's going on in their lives. And secondly, they discover that they can give what's going on for them in the moment, and that people are there for them, that they can be heard, that they can touch others, feel emotionally connected. And that's very, very powerful and transformative.
Sounds like it is. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Carrie, is because people don't know what they don't know. And quite frankly, they don't know that this even exists as an option. Because I'm sure as much as you try to get it out there, I mean, you've written a book, I'm sure you get it out as much as you can out in the world about this method. To help people get more in touch with their emotional health. People just don't know. So that's one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you, is just to make sure that people understood this. So let's go to somebody who's coming out of a relationship. Do you address, maybe not through this particular method, or maybe through the method, but do you address helping them figure out what went wrong in their last relationship and what part they played in its, I don't know what word to use here. I was going to say demise, but that's a little extreme. Downfall. I don't
Yes.
like the word failure. I just, how do you help people in that regard? Because that's a big issue that is so not addressed by most people, particularly men.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm not afraid of the word failure. I like to make it a little more ordinary. We all fail all the time in little ways and big ways. So I think that's another thing that is valuable to radically accept about us, ourselves. And then I think this goes back to a little bit of what I was saying earlier about what I characterize as our underdevelopments. The ways that we just didn't have the tools to, like, so for example, men's anger, the ways that men know and they've learned that when they express anger, they get what they want. For example, that's a broad statement societally, but if you can give me that I'm speaking in broad generalities here. But getting what you want in the moment might not be in the best interest of the relationship, because the relationship is what do we want to do, given that we see things differently. So helping men, they might feel anger, but they can also choose to do something different with their anger. You might come home from work and be furious or really stressed out, and you could come home and stay in a bubble because that's what you feel like doing. But we can also choose to do something else while we're feeling that way. You could come home and ask your wife and your kids questions about their day. That's a way of being giving to the family rather than getting into how I as an individual is feeling. So I help people see that they have more options available to them than what they were seeing in the moment at that time.
Do you help people figure out whether or not they should even stay in a relationship? I mean, is that part of working with couples?
Yeah, absolutely. But when I work with couples, then I'm included in the relationship. So I'm in the best work, we're deciding together. I don't mean that, I don't want to say that idealistically, that it's not messy or not hurtful or that somebody decides they want out. But the how that goes down is very different when we're working together and the couple has support to hear what the other person is saying. That's very different than the couple operating by itself, privately, not talking to each other, and then somebody, throws down the gauntlet and says, I'm out of here. So the how of it is different. It can be more developmental. It can be more helpful for the kids if kids are involved. I have a man who came into a life development group, horrible marriage. And the wife didn't want to work she didn't want to grow. And the group for months and months was like, get out of there, get divorced. But he didn't want to do it. And then at one point he came into group and said, I've decided I'm staying in this marriage for the kids. So he organized the group. He went through a process with us. And then he organized the group to support him to stay in the marriage. So now he comes into group and sometimes he'll talk about the hardness of that decision. But he decided. And then there've been other men who come into group and they're sharing their relationship and the group is supporting them to leave. And he does leave. And then he gets all the support from the group on how to keep going and create his life and the hardness of going through a divorce. See, the thing is that for us to grow, it requires us inviting and allowing others into our emotional and relational lives. And that's not an easy thing to do. And it goes up against a lot of our assumptions. And definitely the sort of isolated individual culture that's very heightened in the United States. But we really, to move through hard things and come out the other side, we need others. Now, I'm not saying talk to the stranger that you pass on the street about this, or, don't call up the cousin that you hate, and, choose your others to do this with, which I hope is me. I hope is a life development group, but you have lots of other people or some number of other people in your life. And if you're not sure you have somebody in your life, you can ask them, hey, can I talk to you about something that's really hard that's going on in my marriage? Or can I talk to you about this? And then you have to see how they respond. Are they someone you can? They might say yes, but they might be trying to solve your problem, and that's not really what you want. You need someone to kind of be with you in the messy middle of figuring out what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, when they get to divorce, there's a lot of opportunities that could have been taken to save the relationship. And I think a lot of men in particular are not very attuned to their spouse's emotions and what's going on. I mean, the greatest example of this is a number of men I hear from who are blindsided by the divorce when their wives tell them they want a divorce, and they had no idea anything was wrong. And everything's been going great, where I'm sure for months or years, she has been, or he has been, really, telegraphing that there's been problems, maybe directly, maybe indirectly. I mean, I know people are very passive sometimes because it's easier to be passive than to be direct.
Yes.
But I just think that if you're in a relationship that you consider to be bad, what Carrie's talking about right now is there's an opportunity to at least figure out whether the marriage is salvageable by figuring out if really it's just you're not listening to each other, you're not really being attuned to each other's emotions. And it wouldn't surprise me, Carrie, if you probably could save 20 to 30% of marriages just by sitting people down and making them listen to each other and actually make sure. So have you thought about that before? Like, how many marriages could be saved if they just worked with someone like you?
Yeah. I'm working with a couple now that, things have blown up in the relationship, and they came to me, and one of the things I had to keep reminding them at the beginning of our work together, we're at a different place now, but I had to keep reminding them, you all haven't had hard conversations in your relationship. You haven't been able to talk about the lack of intimacy in your relationship, or the lack of trust, or whatever. Just remember, the two of you haven't been able to do that. So that's what I'm helping you to do, is how to have hard conversations with each other where you can hear each other. Again, there's usually a lot more, not always, but usually more support that the men need to unbottle. And then when they do unbottle, it's really messy. It can come out really messy and angry. And that's, of course, obviously there's a version of that for women as well, but we're talking about men here. And so I really support the couple to stay there in the messiness. And then I support them to hear each other. I support the men. They give them permission to say it messily. And then I'll basically, we call it kind of like cheat for them or complete them and say it again in a way that's more hearable. It's perfectly understandable that the man wouldn't know how to say it that way, because he's just starting out. He's just starting to babble, expressing his emotions or what's going on for him. So again, that's why doing this with support, with somebody else, I recommend me, but there's lots of people out there, And it doesn't even have to be a coach or a therapist, although, you know, it could be someone else in your lives, a shared friend who could help. But that's really important work. And it's important work to go through again. And the couple might get down that road and decide, no, we can't do this. Or they might decide, let's keep going. We're going to keep working at this, because they can see, and I help them see the new things that go on. Even when the man is unbottling, I'll say, well, that's new. How is that to be unbottling here with your wife and me? Like, already that's doing something new. So you want someone with you working through the relationship who can help the other see that they are growing. They're not the same old person. It's really hard when we're in long-term relationships with anyone, friends or coworkers or spouses. It's hard for us to see when the other's growing because we've been relating to them the same way for years and years and years.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. You know, we've been talking a lot about, you know, people in relationships and helping them perhaps save them, people that are out of a relationship. I'm wondering, would this method be effective for co-parents who have now been divorced and now have to raise a child together and maybe don't like each other very much? And maybe, you know, they had worked with someone like you when they were married, they wouldn't be divorced, but now they're divorced.
Yeah.
And now you've got children who are caught up in the middle of a lot of baggage that you both have. Talk to me a little bit about how you think this might help co-parents be better parents to those children.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your asking this question, because when I say couples work, sometimes now my clients they could, exactly the scenario you're talking about, they could be two best friends who've hit a rough patch in a relationship. Like, couple, you can expand who the two people are of the couple. So exes with children, what a dream if both parents recognize and say, we want to work hard at not putting our kids, we are furious at each other, but we do not want to put our kids in the middle of all this. That's beautiful. I have so much respect for those kinds of exes. I don't think there are a lot out there, but that's a really important, again, don't have to figure it out by ourselves. We can include others. We can shift the lens from the me lens to the we lens. You don't lose yourself in that. You actually become more of who you are. Because in the we, you get better at saying what you want and need, and then having that being created with or built with or responded to. But shifting that lens from me to we that's really the heart of social therapeutics. It's very powerful. It gives people just begin to see so many more options when they can shift into a we lens.
It sounds like that. And I think people that were married who are now co-parenting do co-parenting therapy, you know, regularly. I see that a lot in the legal sphere, particularly with parents that can't even agree on, you know, anything. I would say there's people out there that can't agree on anything. And a lot of that's just, they don't even know how to talk to each other anymore. So I do think this would be very helpful for those people.
Yes.
Carrie, when we just talked about children, how do kids mix with all of this? Because now you've got children who might be, you know, teenagers or even young children. How do they come into play in this whole this whole thing? You know, two parents, and then you have kids, but the parents are getting this help and learning to talk to each other. But do you ever bring kids in? How does that work?
Yes. Again, I'm really glad you're asking about this and bringing this up, because there is the even broader we of the family, whether you are married or not. And there is the impact on kids, which is a real impact. And by now, hopefully, our viewers and listeners are getting a sense of the flexibility of this model of social therapeutics. So there are cases where I work with the children, child or children, And then I also have a parent in a life development group. And then we also do family sessions. That's the kind of enriching environment where people get a lot of support to create new kinds of conversations together, to go off script. You know, I worked with a family and I said, okay, well, what's your family script? And they're like, oh, well, we know each other's buttons and we push the hell out of them. That's what we do. I'm like, okay. Would you all like to create a new script together? And for everyone involved, that again requires or involves emotional growth. With kids are closer to, actually I work with kids from 5 or 6 all the way up, but the younger they are, the closer they are to having been permissioned to play in an unscripted way. If you think about how young kids play, they make the game up as they go along. There aren't any rules until somebody makes up a rule, and then somebody else breaks the rule, and then the kids decide they create another rule, or they move on. Or in a way, if you hear me in shining a light on how kids play, that's a little bit of what social therapeutics is like, in the sense that you keep creating with what's emerging. So kids are so much better at that. I do a lot of improv work with them around emotionality. With kids, you can try on emotions, you can perform emotions, you can perform them from small to big. They're much more, they allow themselves to play around. And that gives them an elasticity, the ways that they discover, oh, I can perform. I can choose whether to have a big tantrum or to say, I'm really mad right now. And then when I work with families, they discover they can say, oh, well, we see this differently. Now what do we do? So there's a richness to this. Again, the kind of support, if people allow themselves to do it, they're so much more empowered to create a more loving, a more connected, a less volatile family environment.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful program that you have. And I think after hearing you, I can see all the different ways it could really help somebody, either an individual, a couple, a family, through, a difficult time in their life, or just a regular time in their life, to be perfectly honest. Because none of us really, I don't think any of us really fully know how to communicate with each other in a way that's really great. I really, really think that anyone who has listened or watched this should sort of look at yourself in the mirror and think about, are you actually reaching out for people to help you either have a better relationship, save your relationship, have a better next relationship? There's so many different things that people don't consider. And I think it's, Carrie, I think it's because we all just live our lives, right? We're all just batting the balls in front of our face, as opposed to really sitting back and thinking about our lives more holistically. And then I think you've said this before, what ends up happening is that everything went downhill to a point where it's not salvageable. And now all of a sudden a divorce is happening, when there were so many opportunities. If we were just aware of help, we could have gotten it.
I agree with what you're saying. And I would add one more thing. We live in a culture that is highly individualized in every way, including our assumptions about our emotions, that they're ours, they're inside of us, they're in our head, we can manage them, like everything, that we should be able to figure it out by ourselves. So I want to include that, because it's not even that it's somebody's fault that they find themselves in this position. It is the culture and the world that we live in. So if I were to sum this up, my vision is that we create a world where, and this is what I'm working tirelessly to do, where it is more ordinary to turn to others in your life and say, hey, can I share something with you? Can you help me out here? To include them and to make that activity more ordinary. If we do that, we're going to have a more connected life, and there's more of an opportunity and a chance that we can salvage and grow our relationships rather than have them fall apart and throw them away.
I think it's a wonderful vision, and I hope you get there, Carrie. Well, I really appreciate you being here today. This was a great conversation. If someone would like to work with you, how would they go about doing that?
Well, my website is zpdcoaching.com, and Z as in zebra, P as in Peter, D as in David. That's a concept, one of the foundational concepts in social therapeutics, that it takes people at different levels of development together to create growth. So that's ZPD Coaching. You can email me directly at Carrie at ZPD Coaching, CARRIE. And then let's do a 20-minute consultation, and we'll get to know each other, and we'll see if we're a fit and want to move forward. I encourage everybody to do that. That's low-hanging fruit. What's the worst that can happen? You decide you don't want to do it.
Nothing to lose whatsoever. Well, wonderful. I hope many of our listeners take you up on this offer. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, John.